Good evening, everyone. My apologies, we had some technical difficulties with the internet, but we are looking forward to today's conversation. We will get started shortly. Really looking forward to today's conversation. Hello, Mayor.
How are you?
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm glad technology did not stop us from this conversation. We have been looking forward to it.
Yeah, so have I. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, welcome to everyone that is tuning in. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's Justice Now conversation sponsored by the National Urban League. I'm your host, Jerica Richardson, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives. And so we're here to talk about a topic that has been very big in all of our communities for quite some time. You know, following the tragic death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, really there has been a national awakening around the issue of police reform. And so we've been talking about it and we've been advocating for national reform vis-a-vis the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and other means on the national level. But tonight I really want to focus on police reform from our communities and on the local level, because we all know that all politics is local. And so I am just honored to have a special guest with us tonight, the 40th Mayor of Newark, New Jersey, the Honorable Ras Baraka. Mayor Baraka, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. You know, one of the things that I think is really important when we have this conversation is, you know, we highlight the disparity when it comes to policing in communities of color. Mayor Baraka, from the deal you struck with Uber to your fight for local control of Newark schools to the rapid expansion of affordable housing, you have accomplished a great deal in New Jersey and in Newark specifically. But many people see you as one of the strongest advocates on this very important issue, police reform, and specifically police oversight and accountability. What inspired you to focus on this issue?
Well, I was born and raised in Newark, and, I've had my own encounters with the police personally, my family, myself. I grew up in a household that was very community oriented, organizers, activists, artists in the community. And, since my early childhood, people in Newark have been fighting for a civilian complaint review board in the city for decades. And it just went along with everything else that we were trying to get done in the city, making sure that there was adequate police reform, that we had civilian complaint review board. And then when I took office, the city was already under an investigation by the Department of Justice, the police department. And as soon as I was sworn in, we had to negotiate the consent decree. So all of those things just happened, at the same time for me. And it was appropriate for us to begin to push for it as aggressively as we did.
Well, I totally agree with you, the importance of civilian review boards. I actually served as the senior advisor for the New York City Civilian Review Board. And I recalled really the struggle and the battle that had gone on in Newark focused on subpoena power. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and kind of educate our viewers on what that means and really how it's important to moving the needle and really getting true accountability?
Well, so review boards are incredibly important because what they seek to do is catch bad actors early before they commit something heinous as murder. George Floyd's killer had previous incidents with the police department, maybe 4 or 5. A review board would have captured that early, an effective one, and requested his removal. Subpoena power allows you to actually do a concurrent investigation or an investigation alongside of internal affairs, or even after internal affairs, whatever the city allows or the state allows. But if you don't have subpoena power, you can't review records, you can't call police before you, you can't look at files, you can't look at any of that. All you're doing is opining on an investigation that somebody else has done. In order for you to complete your own investigation, you need the authority to have subpoena. In Newark, we had subpoena power at first. The FOP took us to court. We lost in the first court. We appealed it and won in the appellate division. And they basically said we had the authority to do all of this. And the state Supreme Court said that we had the right to have a review board, had the right to investigate, but subpoena power is not outlined for this body, and basically saying that it was something that the legislature had to do. The legislature had to give us the authority to do that. Interesting enough, the only person that dissented against that opinion was the Chief Justice, Rabner, here, who actually said that we had the right to do this and the authority to do it, and subpoena power was given to us by the authority of the municipal council when they voted on it. But of course, he was the lone opinion there. And so we're fighting now with the legislator to pass ordinance that allows us to have subpoena power.
Well, thank you so much for all your contributions. And really, if there's any guidance that you can give to our viewers on how they can join in the fight and really advocate for subpoena power for your review board. One of the things that we've been talking about is everyone is discussing reimagining and redefining and re-envisioning what policing and public safety should look like. And the beauty of these civilian review boards is it puts power and accountability and oversight into the hands of civilians, those who are impacted by this. And so, I encourage folks to really get involved and engage and, reach out to lawmakers in New Jersey and, encourage your support. New York Civilian Review Board is has been around, and we've seen, a marked difference by having subpoena power. And and in New York, we actually have independent prosecutorial power. That's how we were able to see changes and actually see the firing of Officer Daniel Pantaleo in the Eric Garner case. So for those of you who are used to civilian review boards of old and find them challenging or don't feel like you get the results you want, well, this is our opportunity to actually advocate to make sure review boards like those in Newark and others across the country have the power they need to do their job. Mayor Baraka, I want to take a step back and kind of look at where we are. When the clock struck midnight on January 1st in 2021, Newark, New Jersey reached a policing milestone. The police had gone an entire calendar year without firing one single shot at a civilian. This is a big deal. And what did you do as mayor, and what did your administration do to achieve this successful statistic? Because I'm sure if we look at many big cities across the country, they can't say the same.
Yeah, and unfortunately, as soon as the year opened up, we had one police involved shooting. But I think that, just the work we've been doing over the last 5 or 6 years as it relates to work around the consent decree, which is changing policies and practices around use of force, training police officers around constitutional policing, around de-escalation, all of those things that we created new policies and trained officers on these policies, all of the officers on these policies. We also was able in the last 5 years to hire police officers to make the police department look like the city of Newark. So it's predominantly Black and Latino now, and it never was that way. And many of these officers are, originated in Newark, or their family members are here. So I think that has an impact. Besides the work that a lot of community organizations have been doing, Equal Justice USA, Anti-Violence Coalition, Newark Community Street Team, all these organizations have been working with the police department to improve the relationships with the community. And at the same time, coming up with a strategy where public safety is not just in the hands of the police, but it's also in the hands of community-based organizations that are out here trying to help reduce violence and crime. And when we can do that, it really kind of diminishes the need to over-police communities to have this kind of show of force in these communities at the level that we need, that we needed it at one point. So those things work concurrently to help us reduce the need and desire for police officers to be out here pulling their weapons, doing these all kind of other things. And we hired social workers. So before people were even talking about this whole social worker thing, Newark was hiring one social worker every 10 police officers that were being hired. And this was when we graduated police officers this time, it's the first time in Newark's history that we graduated social workers with those police officers. Social workers that get called to situations where police normally are the only ones on the scene, and help us kind of change the relationship between what's happening in the community and what the police job and function and our requirement of them is. But it takes the whole community to develop a strategy like that. And we're not completely there yet. Obviously, I think there's a lot of work the police department has to do, and there's still a lot of work that the community has to do in terms of believing that there can be alternative strategies to reduce violence and crime in your community and not have a cop on every corner. Because the community folks, they're victimized by the things that happen in our community as well. And that's another side of it that we don't discuss, but leaders and elected officials are held responsible and accountable for that side of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that really resonates with me. And, kudos to you for really focusing on making sure that our communities have the support that they need and bring social work into the fabric of the police department. You talked about your experiences with policing, and so many of us have had them in our communities. We know Black men are 20% more likely to be killed by police. And the other issues that we're sometimes grappling with in our community, gun violence, and others, really cause trauma in our communities. So can you talk a little bit about the focus on trauma, the thought behind bringing social workers in, and really the Trauma to Trust program that I've heard that you've developed in Newark?
Absolutely. I mean, we are a trauma-informed city. That's what we say. We try to get all of our institutions to begin to train themselves to identify trauma, and in the next step to begin to treat trauma when we see it. The way we treat each other and deal with one another, whether we're on the street or even elected officials to residents and residents to elected officials, the kind of trauma that we've experienced causes us to act out and hurt one another in a way that we don't do to other people, right? And what we try to do here is identify that trauma. And so the Office of Violence Prevention Trauma Recovery is designed to help us reduce violence and crime by, going in the community, not just mitigating violence through conflict resolution, through, education, but also treatment. Right? Treating people who have been victimized by trauma. The data shows us that people who grew up in households where their siblings or folks that have been incarcerated are more likely to be incarcerated themselves, or been victim of violence are more likely to be victims or perpetrators of violence themselves. So we go into these communities and we try to offer programming and help and support to folks who have been traumatized so they don't commit trauma or become victims of trauma again, to break that kind of cycle and present them with alternative pathways to get out of these kind of traumatic relationships and experiences that they have over and over and over again and find themselves in. Being in this country has been a traumatic experience for us in and of itself. It's just been traumatic through generations of trauma. And then the things that we experience and see because of poverty and crime and violence in our community layers that trauma. And so, you have people that are dealing with people in school, in law enforcement, in the medical community who are traumatized themselves, and are supposed to help people, who are victims of trauma. So it becomes really cyclical. So we try to identify that first, and we operate from that point of view. We even have a program where police officers and community members sit in a room and talk about the traumas that they've experienced from one another in the community, and what they expect. And what their fears are, and all of those things, to try to make the relationship better by really being honest and truthful, and lay out all of the issues that we have with policing in our community, why people feel the way they feel, why they're afraid of police in their neighborhood, why they don't want to call the police, why they don't want to cooperate with the police, all of those things. And police talk about their traumas, things that they've learned. When you're a police officer in America, you learn all these things about Black people and Black and brown people, and everything that's going on in their community that is violent, that these people are savages, they're animals, that this is going to happen, that's going to happen, this going to happen, this going to happen, and then you drop them in that community, right? After you put all that stuff in their head and their heart, and any human being is going to feel like, that they have to protect themselves or get home to their family or whatever. And once you put all of that racism in their head, that white supremacy, because it's learned, right, in their head, they respond that way in these communities. They respond that way in these neighborhoods, especially in a very highly volatile situation where stressors are involved. Those things come out immediately. And we don't treat that, right? And it needs to be treated, right? White supremacy causes trauma.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the point on the head when you were talking about all of what we're consuming. We see it on the videos, we see it on television, we see it in how are people of color depicted, how are we seen? We are seen as the problem, as opposed to part of the solution as human beings, part of the community. And so, yes, I mean, we're digesting this, and that's people of color, that's law enforcement of color, and it's showing up and really the interactions with our community. So I applaud you for really sitting folks down and having that shared experience, because we need a lot more healing. And I think there are definitely things that we can do to be preventative. We recognize that there's so much trauma that's happening in our communities, but I really want to turn to the concept of our youth and young people, because I know you were a principal, and that you were in the space of education long before becoming mayor. And we know that so many of our young people are having interactions with law enforcement on the street, in their homes, in the communities. But there has been this movement across the country to have a really deliberate conversation about whether or not police belong in our schools. And part of the thing that has come up, you talked a little bit about social workers, is that in many cities, the number of social workers really isn't sufficient to address the issues that young people have. And we are almost policing them as opposed to really solving the underlying issues. Can you talk a little bit about your experience as a principal and kind of your thoughts on that and policing in our schools?
Right. We're not almost, we're policing, and we are. That's exactly what's happening, because we don't deal with the issues, the foundational issues that cause the behaviors that we're experiencing. And a lot of the educators are not trained in those areas, so they do not know how to deal, even identify the traumas that they see. If I'm in a housing project, and this is a real story when I was a principal, if I'm in a housing project, the police come and raid the housing project, they arrest my older brother, my father, everybody else in the community, I have to go to school, like in the middle of that, right? So I go to school, and the first thing I come into contact with is a metal detector and police officers, right? That's triggering before I even get in the door, right? And so, and nobody knows any of these things that happen. So at least in our area now, the police, even the DEA and all these folks, which was a program designed by the DEA in the city, if they arrest anybody or anything happens over the weekend, they have to identify, they have to call the school and let the school know that this happened to this kid, so forth and so on. So when they come to school, that there's a group of people waiting, to treat them, to deal with them differently than it would, if they didn't know that information. And police officers are not trained themselves in dealing with children in a way that they need to be dealt with in terms of their developmental side, in terms of their mental health and their stability and trauma. They're trained to arrest people and intervene in people who are violating the law and crime. So they're not there to nurture or develop the children, even though there may be a few that try to do that, right? So I think the money is better spent with us making sure we have social workers, opportunities, alternative pathways for young people when they come to school to be able to deal with some of these triggers before they explode, to treat kids in a different kind of way, and to be able to help them get through the things that we know that they're going through instead of ignoring it. We pretend that these things don't exist in education. We teach them despite those things, not because of them. And that's the difference, right? Kids come in, they have to learn. That's true. They do have to learn. They have to pass these tests, in spite of the fact that, their brother just got shot, or they just witnessed a murder, or their friends were just killed, or, the police just raided their home, or their lights were turned out, or, all these things are happening to them. And it's not post-traumatic because it doesn't end. It's continual. And so they have to succeed and excel despite those things. And so we message to them, like, you have to be strong enough to succeed, even though these things are going on. And some of them are strong enough to do that. And they do it, right? They mask their trauma, and it may come out in other ways when they become adults, but they mask it to get through this process. But the majority of kids don't. Like, many kids are not able to do that. And so we have to teach the kids not in spite of their trauma, but because of it, right? And add that on to what we're teaching, and giving them an opportunity to have the tools to pull themselves out of cycles that we've seen other people fall into because of this.
As I'm seeing in the chat, there is, just so much, and folks really agree with you. They talked about the school to prison pipeline, they talked about children in foster care, and really all of that weight. And, I will say, we are a resilient people, but we also have to do the work to support our kids and our families and our communities. You talked about spending money. And I think that's another topic that folks want to hear about. Can we all hear the catchphrase, defund police. And so I want to hear what that means to you. But I also want to give you the opportunity to talk about some of the actions that you've taken. You redirected $11 million from the police budget and put it towards an Office of Violence Prevention.
Yep. And we're going to do a 3-year strategy to release about $20 million to community-based organizations that are helping reduce violence and crime throughout the city as well. We did that because the things I just talked about, right? We like to say that we can get through anything. We persevere. We're resilient. We have to. We've been through all this stuff these people threw at us and continue to throw at us, and we're still here. And it's something to celebrate about our strength. But the reality is we've been broken because of that. Our families have been hurt because of that. Our children have seen us hurt, and so these things are exhibited in our communities through shootings and violence and murder. That is escalating in our community. Even now, the domestic violence across the country is rising. There's more violence happening in our community now than when they first started recording violence, right? So it's up like 30% nationally. In Newark, we have domestic violence where children are attacking their parents. So this stuff is serious, right? So it's not, we can't ignore the fact that we've been harmed by this, right? And we need to say that because that's also a part of why we need reparations. But we've been harmed by this, and so we have to create an opportunity for us to help us fix ourselves. And that's just not the job of the police, and they can't do that, right? And so if we begin to look at public safety or reimagine public safety as an effort between all of the community, then we obviously have to put money towards that. And if we're putting money towards public safety, we use the public safety budget to be able to bolster this idea that we need to have a partner with public safety that involves, practitioners in social work, practitioners in psychiatric and psychological work, practitioners in community-based intervention, violence reduction, credible messengers. We have to put money in that area, and that's what we're going to do, and that's what we have been doing. And we also believe when that part of the community works well, then it reduces the need to have as many police as we did at once. The problem is really, what we're used to in our community. So when you say defund, the people you don't have to worry about conservatives and right-wing crazy people coming to stop you from doing that. The people who you have to really focus on are the people in our neighborhood. And we have not messaged that properly to the people, to our families and grandmothers. We just have not. That's just self-criticism that we need to take. We throw these things out here, but we're not explaining it to grandma who can't walk to work or walk out of her house because these guys are outside her building, or people are getting shot in front of her project, or a grandmother is shot like in Newark, or a 2-year-old or 3-year-old that creates this environment that's tense. So when I go to community meetings, people say, where is the police, right? They ask you for police officers, right? They want to see police in their neighborhood because they equate safety with police. If you're in a suburban community, that's not the same thing. If you're in a suburban community, when people see the police, they think something happened. They say, oh, why are the police here? Did something happen? Is something wrong? Because they equate police with problems, right? We equate police with safety because we don't have the other apparatus that exists, the institutions that help us as in those other communities, that help their families, help their kids, help all of these things. So it reduces the need to call the police all of the time. Every problem that we have, we call the police. Everything. We having problems with our kids, we call the police. We hear a noise, we call the police. Kids playing with fireworks, we call the police. People's music too loud, we call the police. Police are used for all of these things. And so when I go to community meetings, the people who I'm debating with are people in the community who want to see the cops in their neighborhood.
Well, it's definitely some education that we need to do, and we need to change the paradigm and our expectations about what is needed to solve our problems and our issues. And so that's one of the reasons the National Urban League created its 21 pillars for redefining public safety and restoring community trust, because we think this needs to be, we need to have a framework and plan in all communities that are centered on communities. My mother-in-law lives in South Ward, and so I hear positive things about the Newark Community Street Team. So maybe they're not seeing the police, but I know she is recognized seeing the Newark Community Street Team. Yep. And what's that look like?
And we have to get them used to that. So Newark Community Street Team out there doing safe passageway in the morning and afternoon, making sure kids get back and forth to school safely in those communities. Even identifying stores and locations that people can go to when they get into problems. We're trying to expand that across the entire city in multiple neighborhoods, especially now after COVID. It's been a lot of problems in schools, so we want to make sure that they're present. Also, to go in neighborhoods, helping reduce violence through conflict resolution, through all these high-risk intervention. So they see those guys out there, but they also see people from the Office of Violence Prevention that are out there doing, going into schools, talking to kids in cafeterias, pulling kids aside, dealing with them. Also out here treating people's families, who making sure there's no retaliation of violence, making sure people have access to resources and tools that help them pull themselves out of the situations that they're in. So we have hospital-based intervention programs. We have the hub that uses art and culture to pull kids in. And get them out of the kind of negative lifestyle, right? The Anti-Violence Coalition that are out here using education and opportunity to pull kids and counseling to pull kids in the right direction, and adults as well, for that matter. So there's a multitude of organizations that exist in the city of Newark under what we call the Brick City Peace Collective. which is, maybe a dozen organizations that exist that do this kind of work collectively. And so we want to create coordinated intervention, and we're still trying to do it. We're not 100% where we need to be at yet, but we're still trying to unfold it to a place where it's seamless. Our responses are seamless. The way we deal with it is seamless. The good thing is that when police have issues now, they reach out. 5-6 years ago, they would never call the Newark Community Street Team to help them do anything, or the Office of Violence Prevention to call any social workers for them to do anything. Now, that kind of relationship is growing, is becoming symbiotic, and that's what we need.
And why do you think they're doing that? Is it because they're seeing results? What's changed?
Absolutely, because they see results, and it makes their job easier, frankly. And some of these officers are from these neighborhoods. Now that we've hired these folks, they know that these folks and people in our community need this, and they hire them. And if somebody is hurt, if somebody is shot, and they go into the hospital, they want to be able to call somebody to come and assist. They want to be able to have folks in the community to help us, get violence and crime down. It makes their job easier, makes them safer. They begin to understand that this idea that everybody in our community is out here trying to create problems and don't know what they're doing, they're negative. That myth is dispelled every time they meet and talk to them. They're talking to intelligent people, some with degrees, others who were previously incarcerated, who've changed their lives around, who are out here doing real work. They see that, and the proof is in the pudding. So they call these people for assistance.
Well, I love that. And I love the investment in our community and having community there, because more often than not, those closest to the problem are those closest to the solution.
That's
and
right.
You've created, I think, a blueprint for more restorative justice in our communities and more community involvement. And before we close, I would just like to ask you, one question. We've seen a number of African-American mayors elected to big cities this cycle. I would love to hear, any advice that you have for them when they're taking office in the middle of a pandemic, when we still see upticks in violence and crime, and we also have a community that have felt over-policed and are really fighting for and calling for more accountability. Those are a number of things to juggle at once. What advice would you give to your new colleagues as they step into these roles?
I would say, one, that, first you have to lean on something that's higher, whatever that is, to keep you grounded and stable and focused on the things you need to do, because you're not going to get it right every day. And everybody is not going to be pleased and happy. And every day is not going to be a great day. Ken Gibson, the former mayor, said to me that there is no good year, right? People say, oh, next year is going to be better. There is no good year. Every year there's going to be a problem. And this is what we've signed up for, right? And so you have to be grounded in something, more stable, higher than yourself, to be able to focus and get through this. Second, I would say you have to be collaborative and understand that you don't have the answers to all of these problems that existed 40, 50 years before you took office. This stuff is endemic and systemic, and you can't be arrogant enough to believe you're going to solve them in 4 years. What you can do is try to do as much as you can while you can. Obama said one thing, I wasn't able to give everybody health care, but millions of more Americans have health care because I was there. If you keep that posture and understand that you need to be collaborative with all of the folks that are out here in the community, some of these folks have been working and doing this for a long time, empower them. Use them as partners, bring them onto your administration, work with them in different ways to help them solve some of these age-old problems that existed before you. And unfortunately, some of them will exist after you leave. Your job is to weaken them and move us closer to victory than we are in the present sense. And so collaboration is extremely, extremely important, right? And I would say take your time in trying to solve some of this stuff. And I don't mean like, just kind of gradualism. I think that taking your time, meaning be thoughtful about it and make sure you have the right people that are working on it. Obviously that, Sometimes you're going to bring people there. They're not the right ones. You just got to remove them and bring the right ones in. And don't be afraid to do that. No matter what anybody says, you got to get rid of people and bring new people in. Do it. This is, you're working on things that have not been fixed. And if people had the answers for it, it would be done already. It's a hard job to do. You wanted to do it. Now you're here. The last thing I would say is don't talk about your predecessor, right? It doesn't matter what other people did. You're in the seat now. Nobody cares what they did, right? They gave it to you. It's your job at this point, right? So now you have to live or die with whatever you got with you. You have to make it happen. And don't use what other people did as an excuse not to get the things accomplished that you need to get accomplished now. Go as hard as you could possibly go and get as much done as you possibly can.
I love that. Own it. Own that opportunity and really make the most of it. And more importantly, have the political courage to do what is needed to stand up and do, what your constituents and what your community has really called you to do. Well, Mayor Baraka, I just want to say thank you for your commitment to the people of Newark, but also your commitment to really elevating and pushing for real accountability in our communities. I've learned a lot from this conversation, and by the comments, I think a lot of those that tuned in have learned as well. And so we look forward to following you and what you're doing, really creating a national model where community is centered. It's not just politicians and law enforcement and lawyers solving our problems. It's the entire community. It's all of us. So thank you so much for this. We recognize that in order to move forward on this issue, that we need to remember that the time for justice is always now. And thank you for being a conduit of that. And we look forward to having you back again. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.